Rise and join me in the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Note for the record that all council members are present and all planning commissioners except Commissioner Maturo and Commissioner Hollowini.
They're not going to be here tonight, or are we expecting them?
No idea.
We don't have any idea, Mr. Chairman. Okay, thank you.
I have not heard that they won't be here.
Okay, they'll probably join us. All right, the way this meeting is going to go tonight, we're going to have a joint meeting with, finally with all the staff presentations, we'll have a joint meeting with Planning Commission, and after that we'll have public comment period, and then we'll adjourn. I'd like to open it, can you hear me? Oh, there. I'd like to open the meeting by saying a few words. And tonight is the 5th Baylands Environmental Impact Scoping meeting since the February determination that UPC's Pacific Plan was complete. In the first 3 scoping meetings, we heard community environmental concerns with UPC project specific plan. Proposed specific plan, excuse me. We also heard emerging project alternatives from the community that should be studied in the EIR. In the 3rd scoping meeting, we received Brisbane's Open Space and Ecology Committee report regarding project objectives. These included items covering topics such as views of the site, energy, open space, green building, transit infrastructure, local and regional environment, global environment. In the 4th meeting, the Planning Commission and City Council had an opportunity to comment on Baylands remediation and redevelopment. Tonight we want to hear your Baylands project objectives. This is an opportunity for the people of Brisbane to define underlying purpose of the project through objectives. Project objectives will assist us in both developing Brisbane's project alternatives and evaluating UPC's proposed plan and our alternatives. Brisbane's theme is that the Baylands shall be a leading model of sustainable redevelopment. Sustainability requires its social, environmental, and economic considerations, a balance in a project that advances our community and provides resources for future generations. Based on community input and the report from the Open Space and Ecology Committee, City staff has developed a list of project objectives. Also in the packet of information are the proposed project objectives from the applicant. Tonight, the Council will consider the project objectives. We anticipate holding public meetings on the project alternatives this fall. We look forward to hearing your creative solutions to the challenges of Baylands contamination and sustainable redevelopment. Thank you. And City Manager, who's going to make the presentation for staff?
The Community Development Director will walk you through the staff report.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, there may be a little bit of repetition between what I have to say and what Doug Donaldson will say, only Doug will be using some PowerPoint slides to emphasize his points. I think that's really valuable because in going over this issue of objectives, myself as somebody who's been around the block once or twice on CEQA implementation, I realize how confusing this can be. So let me start off by saying it's important to recognize that in addition to CEQA, the statute, there's also a set of guidelines for the interpretation of the law that's primarily promulgated by the State Resource Agency. That usually starts off every few years with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research after receiving a lot of input and seeing a lot of case decisions made in CEQA. Then they go through and revise the guidelines. And the guidelines is what gives the planners day-to-day implementing CEQA some guidance as to what the courts have said this section of CEQA means and how you might go about implementing it. So the guidelines also include a discussion under as they review each section of CEQA on how it's been interpreted by past court decisions in order to provide guidance in implementing CEQA properly. And while the courts themselves refer to the guidelines for their decisions, the guidelines authority has been raised. Are they law? Are they guidelines? What are they? And they've been characterized as containing mandatory, advisory, and permissive directives. So therefore, the courts themselves will refer to them. They're not of the same status as the statute itself, but barring any other compelling reasons to the contrary, the courts will refer to them for their interpretation. I set this up all because I think it's important to understand what we struggle with trying to implement CEQA and why there are court cases and why we get challenged for how we interpreted CEQA and the guidelines. Interestingly, CEQA, the statute, contains no express requirement to provide a project description. Now that's an interesting thought itself. However, the guidelines, in order to make the environmental analysis that is required by CEQA to make sense, there is a logical need to adequately describe the project. So the guidelines recognizes this and provides a section, which Doug will talk about, that requires a project description. And under the ABC list of things that should be in your project description, it includes a statement of objectives. I think CEQA and the guidelines themselves are still a little vague because they apply to a large range of types of projects that could have a multitude of different objectives. So we're told that objectives include the underlying purposes of the project. We are directed by Section 124 that the project description shall contain a statement of objectives sought by the proposed project, and that a clearly written statement of objectives will help the lead agency develop a reasonable range of alternatives to evaluate in the EIR. So what it's about. Again, it's more of rather than saying what an objective is, it's kind of describing all the things around it. The staff report initially discusses project alternatives, but this is only to help clarify that a statement of objectives called for under the section in the guidelines on project description is related to the subsequent requirement to develop a reasonable range of alternatives under the law to the project. It's important to clarify that we're not here tonight to talk about the alternatives. Tonight, that will be the subject of additional public meetings once we get an EIR consultant on board, and we'll have some workshops with the public about developing the alternatives. So we're one step before that, back at objectives, but they're important to the subsequent development of the alternatives that we'll be doing. It should be recognized that a statement of objectives typically reflect both the community's and the project applicant or developer's objectives for the project. After listening to the public comments over the previous EIR scoping sessions, especially the input from the Open Space Ecology Committee, and also the written objectives submitted by the applicant, which is attached to your staff report, staff felt that the three major topic areas of sustainability would provide a good organizational framework for a statement of objectives. Those three are the commonly cited 3 E's of sustainability: the environment, economics, and equity, or social equity. And so with that, kind of to put a context around it, I'll have Doug go over the specific sections of the guidelines a little more clearly with the PowerPoint that you can see it, and we'll go from there.
Good. Thanks, Bill, and Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the Planning Commission. I'm again pleased to be here this evening, and I hope that I can help introduce this topic and introduce the discussion that will follow. Let's go on to the next slide here, the starting slide. I think Bill has set the context properly, but I think, again, we've seen this slide before in our other meetings. It's the part of the CEQA process flowchart, and I think we need to emphasize again where we are, and that is that we are just now beginning the second box from the bottom, and we're going to be in that. But we've been in that box for some time, and we're going to continue to be in that box for many, many months. You, the lead agency, City of Brisbane, is now preparing the draft EIR. You're just beginning that, this is one of the important first steps. And I think I probably should compliment you, because most cities and most agencies kind of think of writing their objectives as sort of an afterthought. It often comes too late, and it doesn't get integrated into the thought process of defining the project and and working on the alternatives. So it's very laudatory that Brisbane is doing this right up front. I think it's probably also important to mention that you'll have chances, opportunities later in the EIR process to review and revise any decisions that you make at this stage of the game. So let's go on to the next slide here. So project objectives, what are they? Section 15124, the CEQA guidelines, basically talks about them describing the underlying purpose of the project. With private projects, they clearly include both the developer's intent for what the developer wants to do, and of course, obviously, the city. A specific plan is a kind of legislative document. It's a planning document. So the integration is a planning document for work on private land, I should emphasize. So the integration of both the applicant's goals and objectives and the city's applicant goals and objectives become more important and sometimes more difficult to phrase as you go through this process. It might be worthwhile for me to read the entire section that talks about this, because it's short and to the point. It says the description of a project in an EIR shall contain, section B, a statement of objectives sought by the proposed project. A clearly written statement of objectives will help the lead agency develop a reasonable range of alternatives to evaluate in the EIR, and will aid the decision makers in preparing findings and a statement of overriding considerations if necessary. The statement of objectives should include the underlying purpose of the project as indicated on the slide above. So let's go on to the next slide. So why are objectives important? And I think, we'll say it now. Bill said it, I said it, we'll say it for the third time here, because there's several reasons. But certainly one of them is they are always useful when you're thinking about alternatives. They help frame the alternatives. And it's interesting that in the 30-some-year history of CEQA, this particular topic has been the subject of litigation. There are court cases on how the alternatives the alternatives relate to the objectives of a project. And litigation has rejected some EIRs and sent people back to the drawing boards because of that. If the objectives are too narrowly defined, you can have problems. And if the objectives well, let me just go on to that. If they're too narrowly defined, you can have problems because you don't get a reasonable range of alternatives. So there's a dynamic going on here. An example of one case that I'm slightly familiar with is in Southern California, an agency wanted to develop a jail. It was a temporary facility. They only thought they would need it for 7 years. They did an EIR that assumed that they would use this facility, this men's correctional facility, for 7 years. The EIR was thrown out because they were using that objective so narrowly that they used it to reject the possible alternative that the court said should have been in the EIR of what do you do at the end of 7 years? What if these buildings are built and the public agency decides we'll keep the jail open? They should have looked at that alternative. So you can't get too narrow, too specific in how you write your alternatives. And contrary-wise, there's cases that go the other way. If the objectives are very clear, you can support the EIR. You can have an EIR upheld in court, even though you didn't look at an alternative that other people said, yeah, that would be reasonable. So you can use a good statement of alternatives to be very clear about why you're choosing alternatives in the EIR. An example of that is that an applicant had a contract to, I guess a coal mining kind of contract. And so they had rights to a lot of coal. And they wanted to build a power plant. So the EIR was on the power plant. And they did an EIR, and they did a number of alternatives in it. The EIR was litigated saying, well, why didn't you look at natural gas to fire the power plant? And the agency said, our objectives and the applicant's objectives were very clear from the beginning. This had to be using coal. The court upheld that EIR. It was a very specific statement, very clear about what they wanted to do there. And there might have been obvious things on the ground, the obvious options they had, but the court said, you're okay in doing this EIR, not looking at natural gas. So that's sort of a range of how complicated this can be, and how that little statement of objectives, which might only be a page or two in your EIR, can become very pivotal at the end of the line when you have to certify it. I think, let's go on to the next slide, too. I think I've covered it. Yes, I've already covered part of this. Project objectives help frame the alternatives to be considered in the EIR. So that's very important, and it will be important later when you get into the alternatives definition process. Project objectives can also assist the City Council and Planning Commission, obviously, in making findings. And you need to make findings at the end of the day when this project is, the EIR is certified, and you are in a position to approve your specific plan, whatever it might be. You'll need to make some findings for that. And those findings are going to relate back to that statement of objectives in this way. There'll be a feasibility test. When you make your findings, you're going to have the ability to reject mitigation measures and reject alternatives because you say they're infeasible. Well, what's infeasible? There's a number of things. You could have economic infeasibility. You have a lot of choices, social and economic kinds of infeasibility. But one of the things you can certainly have is that it seems pretty clear in the way CEQA has evolved over the years that you can say, like they did with the coal plant, this alternative is not feasible because it doesn't achieve the objectives of the project. And so that takes you right back to the beginning, right back to the front section of the EIR, and what are those objectives? And that's why they're important. Let's see. I think let's go on to the next slide here. So, considerations in developing project objectives. This is sort of a summary of what Bill and I have already said. Objectives should serve as broad policy direction, and staff has done a lot. There's a lot in the staff report on the proposed objectives that tie into your general plan policies, which are very important here, and that's the city's so-called basic planning document that sets broad policy for the Baylands area, and those are incorporated into the objectives as they should be. The objectives should not be prescriptive or narrowly defined. If you are very, very specific on objectives, you are potentially running into trouble. So I think the example up there is the way you phrase things. Promote non-vehicular access or movement, but not, say, install a light rail line. Because in the end, if you're very specific about something, it may not be exactly what you want. For example, the applicant did a very good job in stating what their objectives would be, and I noticed then that the staff hasn't picked up some of those items that were very, very specific, because some of the applicant statements about objectives, specifically on traffic, were certain locations for their internal roadways certain widths and all of that. Those are fine, and those are definitely a part of the specific plan, but it's appropriate that the objectives be phrased in a more general way, to talk about circulation, not necessarily the width of the roads that people would circulate on. So that's a very good guidance, good guideline there. Objectives should not include components of the project, of the proposed project. And the example here is if it's X million square feet of development, that's not an objective. That's part of the project. You're running into a real risk if you're very, very specific about that. An infill housing development, it wouldn't be an objective of the project, even though it wouldn't be stated that the objective is to build 22 units of housing. The objective, say, might be more general, to build housing that would be consistent with the zoning, or something like that could be the objectives. So it's good guidance when you're writing objectives to not define them too narrowly, and to separate what's really a part of the project description from what's a part of the purpose of the project. We're looking for purpose, for goals and objectives that you think should be achieved and will be the touchstone for your thinking about the project when it comes down to approve it. I think there might be one more slide. No, I think that's the end of the slides I was going to cover. I'm going to turn it back to Bill. But I think I'm going to turn it back to say one more thing, if I could, before I do that, sort of my final statement. I recognize that this is probably a difficult task, to be talking about the objectives of a very large undertaking that's so early in the process. And I think it's important just to summarize and sort of reassure everyone here that whatever you do tonight and in the subsequent weeks with the staff recommendations and with the staff's statement of objectives is not the final word. It will be used going forward by the EIR consultants, but then ultimately you're going to get the staff will get the administrative draft, you will have the draft EIR, and I will guarantee you that you're going to want to take a revisit the statement of objectives in the draft EIR when you see it. So whatever you're doing tonight is not the final word, and I don't think you need to trouble yourselves too much to get it perfect, because you will have, it's going to be a working document, and I think it's important to emphasize that. Otherwise, it's possible people could get stalled for weeks on working on something as difficult as the statement of objectives. So I say you put your best efforts into it now, you get the EIR consultant on board, you get started in the EIR process, remembering that you're going to have a chance to revisit this in a year or so, and in fact things may change and you may want to change the statement of objectives at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Maybe I could get the lights. Well, actually, leave them. I'll need them as well. Now that I think of it. That's what Doug just said. I think is wise, in that if the EIR, the draft EIR, is to give you a full disclosure of the environmental impacts of a project, that might cause you to reflect back on the objectives and want to change those objectives, or only select a certain number of those objectives that seem more appropriate in light of that information. The staff, as I mentioned in the first part of the staff presentation, that we made some assumptions based on a review of the input from the previous scoping sessions, especially the input from the Open Space Ecology Committee, as well as the written statement of objectives attached to your staff report submitted by the applicants. So we thought that the sustainability should be a foundation of any project approved in the Baylands, and that sustainable development, as it says here on the wall, that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it builds on the premise of environmental sustainability set forth by Open Space Ecology Committee's recommendations, and in addition to the environmental environmental considerations. Other key components of sustainability do include social equity and economics. So those being the three, we came up with 19 objective statements, which you have as an attachment to your staff report under those three topical headings. And Ken will go ahead, Ken, a little further. Those are the three. There's the three organizational categories of sustainability. And they are attached to the staff report, but for the benefit of the public, it might be a good idea to run through them. A little bit of tedium, but perhaps informative. So we came up with these first 9 statements under environmental objectives. They include remediate the baylands to a level which ensures safety of all who use the site and eliminates ongoing ecological damage. To incorporate green building approach for all future development of the baylands, wherein buildings are sited, designed, and constructed and operated to encourage resource conservation, minimize waste and pollution, maximize energy and resource efficiency, and promote healthy indoor environment. Preserve, restore, and enhance wetlands and natural habitat on the site and create natural linkages across the site to promote physical and visual connectivity between the San Bruno Mountain and the bay. Promote and encourage non-vehicular access and movement to and from the site and within the site as well. A land use mix, good urban design, the provision of safe and pleasant pedestrian and bike paths, and convenient access and linkages to public transit are all necessary components. To strive to achieve energy neutrality or better through efficiency, conservation, and maximum use of passive and active sources of renewable energy. Safety and efficiency, accommodate project traffic in a manner which does not adversely affect Brisbane or adjacent communities. Incorporate innovative methods to reduce resource consumption and waste generation. New infrastructure should be sited and designed to minimize adverse environmental impacts. And then finally, under the environmental category, the project should be sensitively designed to protect Brisbane's viewshed, taking into account light spillage and pollution, building height and massing, landscape, and landscape balance. Then we had 6 objective statements under social equity, including create an active, vibrant place which strengthens the community of Brisbane and contributes to the sense of place. Incorporates significant open space and related improvements which provide opportunity for a wide range of passive and active public recreational opportunities benefiting the city and the region. Provide employment opportunities for residents of Brisbane and the surrounding communities, thereby improving the jobs housing balance at a regional and sub-regional basis. And contribute to critically needed solutions to regional transit and transportation issues, which will benefit both the project and existing communities. Recognize the regional importance of the project and strive to ensure that that it benefits the surrounding communities. And provide on-site opportunities for public art, education to contribute to public understanding of the site, including its history and ecology, and the project's sustainable mission. Finally, we have 4 economic objective statements, including enhance the city's tax base and future ability to improve services within all of Brisbane. Establish a project which remains economically viable on a long-term basis, including excellence in architecture, which can withstand the test of time. Build in flexibility so the project can adapt to changing market conditions over time without compromising other project objectives, and provide greater choice for Brisbane residents by providing desired goods, services, entertainment, and/or other amenities not currently available within the city. So that's the 19 draft objective statements that the staff came up through culling from the open space and the project applicants and the other members of the community who contributed in the previous scoping sessions that we've had. That's just a draft. I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments and additional thoughts, but it certainly is a good starting working framework. If I can answer any questions or...
Thank you, sir. Council, questions? Yes, sir. Somewhere here you have it. Bill? Somewhere in here you have a definition of sustainability in quotes. In the objective? And then you go back.
It's the overarching theme.
And my question is simply, what is the source of the quotation?
Sustainability has been written up in various academic sources, and this, I believe, is originally came out. Thank you. The United Nations Council on the Environment is where originally this definition of sustainability get going, but it's actually similar to other descriptions in academic in the academic world.
Thank you. Planning Commission, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. The objectives were divided into 3 parts, environmental, social, and economic objectives. I would have liked to see a separate objective statement for safety. I think the safety elements are all kind of intermingled with the environmental objectives. To me, I think one of the big concerns for this particular project is safety, and I think it will be wise to have a separate topic addressing only the safety objectives. And environmental objectives can be the rest of it, like green building and sustainability and all that can come under the environmental objectives.
Well, it's not so much a question as it is a statement, but there will be a chapter of the EIR devoted to hazards and so forth, in which the issue of safety will be analyzed. So, but as far as having a statement to that effect, it certainly is in there currently under environmental objectives regarding project traffic, but we're here because it's a draft and we're taking input, and so that may be something that the council and everybody agrees. We would develop a specific objective statement regarding safety. But again, it may be...
I see at two different places you do have that, but my concern is that it's hidden under the environmental objective, and I think it should be upfront separate so that people know that safety is as a predominant objective here also, and that was my recommendation.
Well, I guess, going under sustainability definition, that it would fall under environment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean,
A safe environment.
I'm sure everybody else would share concern with that, Haji. But I think, safety probably the utmost part of the environmental part. I agree with your concern about safety, but it does cover it under the environment as far as...
Yeah, I think my main concern was that it should be highlighted so that it's not hidden under the environmental, because safety, there were several things that were addressed, not only the sustainability, but also hazard associated with the tank farms and traffic and all of that. So it will be a nicer way to put it in a separate column, a separate objective altogether, so that anybody is looking at it, they can it just relates to the safety, is not combined with the environment.
Do you have a suggestion?
Well, as I mentioned, that there are a couple of them recommendations are already here, which are part of the environment, like objective number A, which is a general statement, says safety of all who use the site.
Would you feel comfortable with putting safety is of the utmost importance to the entire project, like in the beginning or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to do is I would add one more, like instead of environment, social equity, economic objective, and safety objectives. Under that, you can address all the issues related to the safety, so that the environmental concerns are concerns related to the energy, concerns related to the use of the alternate sources of energies and all that. And under the safety, you can have this safety related to the toxicity at the site, traffic, and also the tank farm hazards. So I think it's a little better organization in my mind.
Well, in other words, if you're going to have an objective, it should start with two. So go from there. Two, do what?
To do, I will put safety objectives. Under that, I will define A. There's like number A, we can put that under safety objectives. A, remediate the bay lines to a level which ensure the safety of all who use the site. And in the B, we can have more specific the objectives, like to ascertain that there are no traffic circulation problems related to this project. And the third will be to ascertain that all the toxicity safety issues concerning the toxicity at the sites are properly addressed. So these are just some of the things that I'm thinking as I'm going along. Well, I didn't get a chance to write it myself, but some of the ideas that I'm trying to throw for the discussion here.
Okay, we're here to establish objectives. And generally, if you make a statement starting with two something, then you can be a little more specific.
Yeah.
To maintain safety of everyone, whoever uses the site, fine, we have that.
That's a very like encompassing everything, but then you can be more specific. Safety of the people using the site from any kind of a toxicity effects, safety related to the tank site, safety related to the traffic circulation. So you can make the two statements based on that.
Why don't you put that on paper, because you give it to staff?
I will do that.
So when you organize the document, you'll have your input and your thoughts.
I will do that.
Thank you.
And there is a safety section in the EIR.
There will be, of course.
Yeah, a section dedicated to safety of any proposed development. And so all the safety issues should and will be addressed in that section.
So that's another reason to have a safety objective as a heading itself, because then it can relate to the safety discussion in the EIR.
Do you see any problem with that, Bill?
Well, go back to our earlier part of the presentation, considering developing the project objectives. Objectives should serve as broad policy direction. They should not be prescriptive or narrowly defined. I think, there are probably many ways we could look at this. I think the essential, in terms of the toxics on the site, I think the first objective that was read, remediate the baylands to a level which ensures the safety of all those who use the site and eliminates ongoing ecological damage. Then there's another one that talks about safety in regards to project traffic. There's no specific one that it's an objective of the project in regards to the tank farm, because the tank farm is not the project. It's an element of the surrounding environment. So I think it would be, I understand where Commissioner Jamil is coming from, but I would just go back to whatever statement that he submits to us for consideration should observe that it's a broad policy direction, not a prescriptive or narrowly defined term, which would not really be what the intent of the objectives are.
I will try to do that.
Yeah, and as Councilman Barnes pointed out, all of that will be addressed in the environmental impact report anyway, so.
And we're talking about the objectives of the project as opposed to maybe the objectives of the EIR, which the EIR has the objective under the law to be full disclosing and adequate assessment of the impacts, which will include a chapter on hazardous environmental hazards.
Which would be much more detailed anyway.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I have a question. Thank you. Good evening. Under environmental objectives, staff, my question relates to water usage, and I understand that. Closer to the mic. Okay. Under environmental objectives, my question is based on water usage. I understand letter E talks about achieving energy neutrality, and letter G talks about innovative methods to reduce resource consumption. I just want to make sure that the idea of water usage, particularly going forward, is included in these general statements. Do you feel that letter G is the place that might happen?
I think the incorporated innovative methods to reduce consumption and waste generation would probably be an umbrella that would include that.
Okay. And then my second question is under economic objectives, and letter Q talks about establishing a project which remains economically viable, and I just want to make sure that the consideration of a project that could become a drain on the city is somehow answered. And by remaining economically viable, is that the antidote to becoming a drain or becoming a cost factor for the city? Do we feel that we've covered that? I mean, I suppose there are projects that could be not economically viable, but they wouldn't also be a burden to the city. And so I just want to make sure that there are also projects that could become a burden to the city. An example might be, I've heard in some communities where golf course development occurs with the expectation that there's going to be some revenue generated, and then many golf courses are built throughout the region, and particular usage doesn't warrant the funds to maintain it, and then cities end up having to take over that responsibility, and it becomes a cost. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to make sure that we understand that we're not looking at objectives that could cost the city.
Yeah, under the criteria of being a broad policy direction and not narrowly defined, I think that economically viable means both sides of the coin, both economically feasible from a developer standpoint, that they would bother to go ahead and implement the project, and also includes that it provides an economic benefit to the city and a sustainable economic benefit to the city in terms of tax resources, tax load, and so forth.
Because all the other services that might be required to augment development, for example, additional police or fire or safety, whatever, that would mean that the project in its being viable would not be a cost to the city in those same ways.
Correct. And when you looked at the public services section of the EIR, if the EIR were to determine that the project would demand a substantial additional increment of police and fire protection and so forth, it would not be in concert with that proposed objective. However, there may be mitigation measures, and typically would for that, in terms of the developer providing the funding to offset the impact from the project. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? No? Council? Nothing? Okay. You ready to open the public hearing? Okay. We'll open the public hearing, and I have a few slips here, but everyone will get a chance to speak. Keep in mind you have 5 minutes. This slip we carried over from the last time the lady showed up to speak on the subject, but it was a different council meeting. And so I'll let you go first, please. And Evan Perry of Brisbane.
Hello, I'm Erin Perry and I go to Whitman Middle School. The reason I am here is because I want you to hear my idea for the Baylands project. I think that the best thing we can do is first to get everything cleaned up, and then we can start putting in bike trails and walking trails, and a recreation center for the summer, where we have the recreation department at school, but it would be more for kids who would like to do art or music, more than just going there and paying money for field trips. And I'm thinking that we could take a boat onto the lagoon for any people who just want to fish out in the middle. And there could be walking trails and picnic tables and benches. And we can plant native plants, because I remember like 2 years ago, you could look at the Baylands and count like 17 jackrabbits everywhere, but this year I've seen none so far. So I think if we planted more native plants and had a more natural surrounding, they would come back. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Cal Webster, 360 Kings Road. I have 2 points I'd like to make. The first one, I think Lee Panza thought is important, and I do too, and that's sort of a negative. And just, I don't know how you would put this in there, but I'd like to see garage parking and not parking lots. IKEA does it in their stores. The Santana Row has it, and I'm not sure how you would get that in there as, because it's sort of a negative. We don't want to see parking, But let me skip to the third one. So the second item, I'd like to see a statement on the environmental objectives. The objective would be attempt to restore access to the bay presently denied by the freeway. Now, that's a pretty broad statement, but here's what I have in mind, basically. And that is that in some way, incorporated into the project would be building over the freeway. This has been done at many other locations around the country. I can visualize a building with, let's say, a parking garage on the bottom level, retail on the second, or possibly third, and a rooftop green garden which extends over the freeway and then has maybe a stair down to the other side of the freeway for access to the bay. I think if the developers were looking at the possibility of doing something like this, this would greatly enhance the development if you had a green rooftop park, and you could even go up, I don't know, higher than that, or something to that nature. Now, this isn't going to happen unless the city and the developer think about approaching Caltrans, because it's not part of right now. It's not part of the site. So you gotta see. Well, okay, can we build over there? Can we approach the state? And that should be done probably at an early time. I don't think that's a pie-in-the-sky idea. I think restoring the bay and by building over the freeway is a realistic idea, but it's going to take a lot of work to incorporate that into this concept or the development, basically. That's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Let me add just one more thing. It's vaguely hinted at in C. Preserve, restore, and enhance wetlands and natural habitat on the site and create natural linkages across the site to promote physical and visual connectivity between the San Bruno Mountain and the bay. I'd like to be a little bit more specific as far as physical access to the bay, or restoring physical access to the bay, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Tom Hines, please. Tom? Do you want to wait? I'll get somebody else instead.
I'm not sure if it really relates to...
Okay. The other slip I have is from Mr. Michael Schumann.
Thank you, Michael Schumann, Brisbane resident. I like a lot of what I see with the objectives, and there's some good stuff in there, but it feels more on the technical nature. The one thing that I feel is missing is defining the place. What is the sense of this place? And I'd like to read the objectives and feel comfortable that what's going to be built out there is something that we all are happy with. Before I came down, I started a list of objectives. It's changed a little bit since reading what was prepared by staff. But one of the things I want to see is that when people hear I'm from Brisbane, when they ask where I live and I say I'm from Brisbane, they either give me that blank stare or their eyes light up and they say, oh, that's a cool place. I wish I lived there. So in defining the place, the sense of place, top of my list is that it's unique. And so I could see that as an objective, that both the development as a whole, the architecture, the retail tenants there, many of them are unique. That it's not something that one could find anywhere else in the Bay Area in the country. Another objective would be that it doesn't overwhelm Brisbane, both by the scale of development or in its character. That we have something really special here, and that we figure out, even though it's a giant site, that we figure out a way to develop that it doesn't overwhelm the sense of what Brisbane is. I'd like to see an objective that talks about the open space in the Baylands, that's both dominant and defining element. And to explain that a bit, I've started thinking about the development out there as being grouped into villages, where actually the green space, the open space, surrounds the development that are grouped together. Not villages as in housing, but as in groups of places. And I think that we need a little sense in the objectives of that we're dreaming, that there's something more, something grand that we want. And finally, I would like to see an objective that the development supports our schools and the other institutions that make our community strong. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anya Miller?
Thank you, Anya Miller, resident. Listening to this again and all remembering all the input here so far from people, and then the specific plan that you have, there is a conflict there. The specific plan is only part of the Baylands, and the EIR, I suppose, is based on that project as defined by the developer on part of the Baylands. We, the people, consider the Baylands as a whole, and we are concerned about all the elements of the whole site. And the input that we have given so far, I think almost everybody is considering the site as a whole. And so I have a little bit of a problem how the EIR, as a technical document defining and addressing the specific plan, will cover our concerns that are for the whole site. Or is it just, as the planning director says, the surrounding area. That's of less importance than a specific site.
Through the chair. The EIR will take a fairly comprehensive look of its interaction with adjacent properties from the site, and that will come through it comes through in the specific plan in the sense that a city is responsible through the general plan law, and this represents a big portion of the city, to look at adjacent areas and their relationship to the city's planning. So as a specific plan, somewhere between the general plan and an implementation document, it will have to look at the context that the site is in overall. So the regional traffic situation, the regional open space, to evaluate open space properly, you'd have to have some understanding of the open space, the city's open space element and relationship to that, and also the open space, I suppose, in terms of immediately adjacent areas that have some balance of open space and other types of land uses will all kind of be taken into consideration, I think, in the land use section of the EIR.
But still, the definition of the project that is required for the developer's purpose is limited, whereas our purpose that we're talking about here as objectives, it covers the whole site, right?
Yes, the framework plan requires the site to be planned as a whole, even though it may be phased in more than one phase of development. So the framework plan outlines the larger context of the property, the linkages between infrastructure. It may be something that it will have play into the alternatives analysis in the EIR.
But the developer has not defined the rest of the project that we are defining.
Not specifically the land uses, and other than the framework plan. The general plan recognizes that that there might be more than one specific plan in an area as large as the Baylands, or they may be a specific plan that was implemented in phases with an environmental review, overall environmental review based on the framework, but not the specific land use that is in later phases.
Okay. Then I'd like to address the very wide term of sustainability. In business terms, economic terms, both for the developer and the city, of course, it means continuous profitability and revenue for the city. And in today's times, it's really an overwhelming effort to try to guarantee such, especially in view of the environmental situation that we have here. And so I'd just like to come back to what I've said before, and under the second star that I have of environmental objectives, I think we should strive to achieve better than neutrality of energy production. And that is because sustainability includes levels. I think if we have local level sustainability, meaning for the community preservation, and that word is not in here either, preserving the character of Brisbane. And that sustainability for Brisbane is preserving. And for a local, regional, for our neighbors, it means trying to do better than before, so that we don't have all the negative impacts. The tremendous development coming in this valley, for instance, is negative impacts, and we can do something that is positive up front, and that, of course, energy would be such a thing. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Yeah, under the social equity objectives, employment opportunities, improving the jobs housing balance at regional, sub-regional levels. I understand today the main concern about that balance is housing, not jobs. There are plenty of jobs, at least now, and not enough housing, and that's why there's such a push for housing. And so here we're talking about generating jobs, and that doesn't seem like such an objective that should be at this level. I would just leave that out. Sustainable may require both jobs and housing. In order to be truly sustainable, of course, people should live where they work. So if that can be somehow accomplished, that should, but I wouldn't put it in at this level of planning. Yeah, and then, of course, finally, sustainability is not just local and regional state, but it is national and it is global. We have a tremendous global situation, tremendous hazards for the future, and we really have to consider our responsibility for the globe and for the people of this earth. And I hope that you people also will remember not just your personal investment or experience with the MAC, but what you owe the people here and in the world. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good, James. Mary.
I think that staff did an excellent job, from my perspective, of putting together these objectives. It's gratifying as a member of the Open Space and Ecology Committee to see such a good restatement of a lot of the points that the Open Space and Ecology Committee wanted to bring up in consideration of this project. One issue that I would like to see with slightly greater clarity relates to the first objective about remediation. The objective right now says remediate the baylands to a level which ensures the safety of all who use the site. And I have no quarrel with that wording, but safety can be defined in different ways, and rather than just say something kind of general like that, I think we want to be clear that we want to take every precaution to make sure that it's safe in the future, not just that it meets current standards, not just that it looks like it's going to be safe, but that we ensure the maximum possible safety. And I think that includes actually cleaning up a lot of the toxins. And I think that should be one of our objectives, to actually clean up the most toxic parts of the bayland, and to incorporate there are many new and pretty interesting, exciting bioremediation methods that could be incorporated, especially in conjunction with wetlands, but not exclusively. I know the Citizens Advisory Group was taken on a tour of the baylands last week, and one of IPC's, UP's, what the heck is their name? UPC's environmental engineers mentioned that they're injecting molasses in the area where they're to get some of the VOCs to drop out of the soil in OU1. And I think that before we talk about sending people out there to spend a greater part of their day, that we should talk about an ongoing program, not just before the Baylands is built, but afterwards, to make sure that anything that comes out of the site is remediated and actually cleaned up and not just covered up.
Thank you. Lori?
Good evening, Lori Liu, Brisbane resident. I've reviewed the objectives in the staff report, and I think they're fairly good. I just have a couple of comments. Number one, or Part A, environmental objectives, remediate the Baylands. I agree that that's too general, too vague. I think that, as Commissioner Jamil mentioned, that we need to specifically make reference to the tank farm and the safety concerns associated with that in the environmental objectives, or perhaps in a separate part. I think a good way to do that would to have a statement like, address the health and safety issues related to developing in or around the tank farm, and that could perhaps go under environmental objectives. I think that even though it's not part of the proposed development that's on the table, I think that it's something that needs to be in the objectives, because otherwise it's unclear what the Baylands is, and it should be out there in the objectives, not just in the EIR report. Secondly, the second environmental objective is to incorporate a green building approach. I think that based on especially the presentation on Friday by James Wines, that there are a lot of good ideas that we could include with that. Not just, that presentation made me realize that that sustainability is not just about, having solar power out there and recyclable uses, but also to encourage public interaction and participation with the site. So if there would be a way to incorporate that into Part B, I think that would be wise. And the third thing, under social objectives, there's a statement, letter O, about providing on-site opportunities for public art and education, etc. I think in addition to that objective, we could have another objective that says that it should incorporate uses that reflect the cultural diversity of the region. That's a general statement. For example, one thing I'm thinking about, I've been to some places, for example, in China, where they have public parks that incorporate uses that reflect in that case, it's the Chinese culture. There's actually things that you can do in the parks that have you interact with different cultural ideas. It's sort of hard to explain in the abstract, but perhaps there's ideas particular to this region that could be reflected in the uses on the site. And then just looking at the UPC draft objectives, I agree that they're too fixated on the site-specific uses, such as retail, and they should be more general rather than site-specific. Thank you.
Thank you. Clara Johnson?
I appreciate the work that everyone has done on these objectives, and I appreciate. I would support all of them. Under the first one, under A, the comments that have been made by a couple of other speakers, including Ms. Liu, I think you need to add something that says that and attempts to remediate ecological damage already done, rather than just to eliminate ongoing ecological damage. And the way this is organized, you have an overarching theme of sustainability, and these objectives are all under the rubric of sustainability. But there are things outside of that, and I think that Commissioner Jamil made a good point about safety, because safety doesn't have to be very specific, and it is in the EIR, but what we're talking about is an objective of the project. And I can think of one, and that would be to raise the level of commercial disaster preparedness in Brisbane, through requirements on buildings out there, commercial buildings. I don't know if that's raised a question. I might be able to say a little more about that. And another issue that's already been mentioned, that's community character. I would think that given the objectives in the general plan, that it would be an objective of this project to reflect the community character and the topographical environment of Brisbane in the buildings and in the landscape architecture. And it also seems as though, with relation to urban planning, that there should be an objective that discusses what the objective of the landscape architecture and the architecture is. What are we trying to accomplish with what we're doing, or how we're relating things to one another. And the final thing I'd like to say is about harmony. There's no objective that talks about the harmony, or I thought there was something, but I couldn't locate it, between this project and whatever project number 2 is going to be, and the areas around it, the Beatty sub-area, Sierra Point, the corridor by Bayshore Boulevard. I think those are my only comments, but I kind of feel as though there are more areas that are outside the area of sustainability. I just haven't had a chance to think enough about them to find them. And I'm afraid I don't support the bay access over the freeway, although I think that having access is a good idea. I don't want to go over the freeway to get it. And I also support roof gardens, but of course we're not talking about alternatives here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Tom Hines. Tom, you ready to go?
Yes. At first I wasn't sure if this related to tonight, but now I'm sure it does. Tom Hines, 41 Humboldt. Honorable Mayor, council members and staff, I want to thank you for inviting Mr. Wines here last Friday night to enlighten us. I think there were 2 areas of significance that came out of that evening. The first was Mayor Bologoff's admitting his ignorance about green architecture, and I hope he spoke for other council members and staff as well. The second item of significance was that Mr. Wines reiterated and summarized many of my comments, and as well as that of many others, only a little more eloquently. He also showed us concretely, and no pun intended, that it is possible to have architecture as art and at a human community scale through imagination. I have not been this inspired in a long time. While an engineer is certainly capable of building buildings, what you usually get is a cold box. An architect spends an equal amount of schooling in art as they do in architecture, and it shows. So in summing up my comments, I urge the city to enlist the services of Mr. Wines, and soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Those are all the slips I have. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? How are you?
Paul Pascal, Brisbane resident. Thank you, council members and planning commissioners and staff and everybody that's worked on this. My comments are in regards to UPC's objectives, if that's okay. One of them is on the research and development. I would hope that they could look into, instead of biotech, envirotech, companies to Brisbane, because that seems to be not only something that would be fitting in the area, but probably would be something within the range of where the future is headed. So that's something that I'd like to see. One of the other issues I have is with the new street collector streets that they're talking about. And they're talking about a new construction of a new collector street called North Creek Parkway. That's going to connect Tunnel Road to Frontage Road, which I don't object because it seems like it could help with the flow of traffic within the development. However, the road will ultimately connect Bayshore Boulevard. And I have a problem with that for the fact that that roadway would be right against Ice House Hill. And Ice House Hill in the general plan and the open space plan is to be preserved. And while we can preserve it and enhance it, it would definitely take away from its purpose. There's a walkway that goes underneath the tunnel under Bayshore. That whole area, I feel, would be affected by an overpass and a roadway, and I really don't feel that there's a need to have that connector when we're connecting Geneva into 101 and we have our new bridge. So if it's a need that's mandated, that's required, I can understand why it's going to be pursued, but if it's something that's just a convenience type thing, I don't see the need, and I feel that it would have adverse effects on Ice House Hill. And the last thing I have is their last number 22 for the new project area for utilities. I had mentioned at a previous meeting that I would like to see storage capacity of water increased, possibly doubled substantially, to be able to provide us with adequate water storage in the event that we didn't have water being supplied by Hetch Hetchy. And so, you know, that seems to be the time that the project would proceed with their own tank for their own project, and possibly the city and UPC could work on a plan to increase that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else? Mr. Burr, you're writing a slip. Why don't you just go ahead to the podium? Okay. You're next, Dana. Sorry. Go on, John.
Hello, John Christopher Burr, 221 Kings Road, Brisbane. I'm proud to be a lifelong resident. And it's a pleasure to be here in front of the Honorable Mayor and City Council people. I want to just talk briefly about definition. One of the things I think that the city ought to take to heart is the fact that statutes are often modified by industry groups, not regular people, big polluters, big oil companies like that. And then at the time that the regulations get written, it's usually circulated amongst the big law firms that represent the oil companies and the big polluters, and so they get weakened again. And so it's important, I think, for Brisbane not to fall into the trap of misrepresenting the reality of the situation in terms of the pollution. You see euphemisms like cleanup, remediation, and safe often batted around by real estate speculators and polluters, when in fact most of these projects and most of the projects are forever toxic. Throwing a little clay around it is called remediation. Pump and treat, where you pump it out of the ground and run through some charcoal and burn some of the things, is called a cleanup. And so most of these sites never really get cleaned up. They're never really safe, and they are forever, in fact, forever toxic. If people later on become sick or ill, everybody who uses those inaccurate and false terms is essentially misrepresenting the true facts, and if people are misled because of that, then there's liability could result. So I think that the city would be well advised to be careful in the language it uses and not use phony terms that are not accurate at all, that are totally inaccurate, like cleanup, remediation, and safe, because it's unlikely that that'll ever happen here. The only way for a site of this nature to be really safe would be to dig it all up and remove it and haul it to a class 1 dump. Which is a toxic dump, which basically is what you have there already. That's what they did in South City, at least for a portion of it. Caltrans had the guys in the moon suits come along. They dug up the toxic contamination, put it in rail cars at night, covered the rail cars, and I believe hauled it off to Utah. And then they came back in and did some wetlands restoration. So that would be a real cleanup in my mind, but anything short of actual removal is not a cleanup. It's not remediation. It's simply trying to pretend it's not there. And I think we ought to be careful with that. And that's all I have to say for tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Dana Dilworth. Dana, I'm sorry I missed you.
Never missed. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Reading the information that was given today, I take exception to some of the things that Mr. Donaldson said about the purpose of the project, and where he claims that it will include both the city and the developer's intent. To me, if the developer is so left field, I'm not quite certain that the intents are the same. And I think you need to, it seems mighty cozy that the city and developer would come up with exactly the same intent. I'm glad several people have spoken of the cleanup, wanting it to be more than just basically a cover-up. And I heard a story on KPFA that Baykeeper had. It's not a story, but they're talking about the legacy of leaving toxins in place. And the thing that they talked about were the leachate that gets into the clam, that gets into the bird, that then defecates, it gets back into the system, and for years and years and years, those toxins stay in our environment. So I think we need to really look at some of the issues. I'm also taking exception to this whole sustainability bandwagon that we're on. And, you know, it sounds good, meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Well, if you have a life and death situation, you realize there are only a few needs that people have in this world: water, air, and some form of energy, either in the form of food or depending upon what it is that you do. Beyond that, frankly, I don't think we have needs. We don't have needs for cheap goods from China. We don't have needs for anything. In terms of sustainability, we need to think about what it takes to sustain life. For environmental objectives, I'm amazed that, you know, we have a specific plan supposed to be specific. And here we're starting to work on the specific plan, but you go, oh no, they need to be broad. I frankly think that they need to be strong enough to determine whether something fits. And almost every single item there, just look at the words. How many times you got the words encourage, minimize, enhance, strive to, contribute to? Why not do it instead of consider doing it? There's a big difference. And I think finally, on social objectives, it makes a statement to provide employment opportunities. I remember when we were running for city council and various other things, that there had been discussion of a business incubator, and just providing jobs is not the same as providing the opportunity for people to create employment. And so providing jobs, $5 an hour, whatever the minimum is, $7.50, whatever, is not what we want. We want a viable community where we're contributing to it. At least that's what I've heard from others. And I guess this is the last thing about the flexibility in order to deal with changing market conditions. We've already, in the 15 years I've been involved with this, we've seen, and I kind of call this the shell game of life, that one moment they're going, oh, we got to do business, 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 business. Okay, we built out business, housing, housing, housing. And to me, it's like, we'll just play the shell game back and forth ad infinitum unless you really set the standards as to what you want. We don't want hodgepodge, at least I don't think that's the case. And I thought it was wonderful when Mike Schumann said, you know, maybe each area needs to be its own village. And I kind of, the other thing I thought was, we're dealing with an east-west plan, and even Mr.
Mayor Pro Tem Waldo?
Yeah. Mr. Waldo had said, you know, maybe we need to do a north-south plan and not an east-west plan. And so there is an awful lot that if we sit down and say, oh, we're going to go along with this, but not really set out objectives, we will just either go around in circles forever or end up with a camel. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go on, I have a number of emails that were presented us tonight. They're from Linda Seekins, Mary Ryan Duffy. Let's see, what's that? I have Jessica Aloft, Maureen and Phil Cornyn, Monera Mason, and Jill Miller. Your comments will be entered into the record, and they'll also are provided to staff so you can put your comments on that board so we have it for future reference. Thank you for sending in your emails. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Are we going to be able to give some objectives that are off the staff's grid tonight, or is that something that we would do later on at another meeting?
Through the chair, there's been a couple of many suggestions for either wordsmithing some of these or adding some through the evening so far, so that's on the table.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Lee, you're next. Oh, let the lady go first.
Hi, Amy Dondy, Brisbane resident, and I was home watching this on TV and had to race down so I could add my comments. I did want to thank everybody involved in this process, all the committees, the council, and everyone who's spoken. I've watched several of them on TV as well, and I have been at various meetings. The ideas are amazing. I thank you all so much. Everyone's thinking of this so clearly. I also would like to thank the council for allowing James Wines to come. I think one of the exciting things that I discovered from his lecture is that we don't have to settle for cookie cutter. And I felt that what that specific plan, which to me was a total oxymoron, since it was anything but specific, was proposing was just something that could have been plopped into Corte Madera or Burlingame or any other place. So we don't have to settle for that. And certainly with the hard work that everyone's doing, that's not what the people want. I did want to address just a couple of things. I love the concept of connectivity because the worst thing that could happen is to have something out there that is totally disconnected, just like how we are not really, this part of Brisbane is really still not connected with the ridge. And so I'd hate to see the Baylands be created and have that total sense as well, that it's just separate and not part of Brisbane. There's some issues I don't know, from what I've heard, if they've been addressed or not. Things such as the height. When I was reading the plan, it was very vague about where they're going to build, and does that mean that they're going to start from on top of what they've created and build up? Or are they talking about going from ground level if they hadn't built up so high? Building noise, anything that gets built out there. We had one pile driver going, building the bridge, and that thing echoed everywhere in this town. And if you were trying to sleep, you probably were woken up by it. Imagine what that sound, it's a bowl there. Imagine what the sound is going to be if there's massive construction out there. Another issue I'm not sure has been addressed is addressing the wind issues into thinking about what can really go out there and what is going to encourage people to go out there. We might have a breezeless day in Brisbane and the Baylands, it's blowing like crazy because the fog's coming in. I don't know how many people know about the Federal Building in San Francisco. They've just redesigned the whole plaza out there. For years, there were non-functional fountains. The reason wasn't the plumbing. The reason was the wind. They built it in a wind tunnel. You couldn't have fountains going without everybody getting wet. So these are all considerations. And another one that I'm very concerned about, I know that the proposal for the EIR does mention about traffic. It's very important that they address the volume of cars in many, many different situations, with and without the Geneva extension, with X amount of retail, X amount of business. All those issues have to be addressed. People are not going to come from one place to get to the Baylands. They're going to come over the mountain, over Guadalupe. They're going to come up Bayshore Boulevard. Some will use the freeway. Some are going to come from Geneva. Some might come from the city. All of those have to be taken into consideration with the volume of traffic. I was out there on June 7th. There was a terrible accident on Bayshore on the freeway, and traffic was diverted into Brisbane because it happened right, I guess, just past Sierra Point. They were letting people go through. There's traffic cop there letting people go through. I was glad I was heading towards the city. At least I got pretty far. It took me 10 minutes to get from Lathrop, which is just past the Caltrans station, onto Bayshore. 2 blocks. It wasn't the volume of cars in front of me, it was the volume of cars on Bayshore. So anything that gets built out there, if Tunnel Road is, from what I've heard, cannot be extended, it can't be widened, it's going to be a 2-lane road, you don't want to have gridlock 24 hours a day. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Lee, please.
Well, I apologize for not being more prepared tonight. I didn't come intending to speak, but rather to listen, and as a consequence, I think this is the first time I've ever been outdressed by John Burr. But you are considering some very, very important aspects of this project, as was described to us at the beginning. These objectives really frame everything that happens from now on, and it will be the material that we'll be looking back on, as we do in planning with our general plan. So while the agenda says consider and approve project objectives, I would hope that you would see the wisdom of taking a little bit more time to think about some of the things that have been said tonight. And I'd like to comment on a few of those things that were said tonight, starting with Haji's comment about safety. And I'm not sure that it was expressed adequately, but safety is a lot more than environmental safety, which is already being discussed in these objectives, but public safety, safety of the general public, the employees who work there, the shoppers that shop there, the visitors that pass through there. Public safety is a broader issue than the environmental issues. And I think everything that's designed and planned out there, public safety should be a paramount consideration. And I think something like that can be incorporated into these objectives at this stage that would express I think, something you all agree with. Cal said something about an issue I had kind of taken a very keen interest in, and that's concealing parking. But at this stage, I think it's probably not appropriate to be talking about covered parking. That's pretty specific. But we should be making a statement of encouraging the, something like statement number H here could maybe be expanded to say, instead of just new infrastructure being sited and designed, but new infrastructure, utilitarian facilities like parking, loading, storage areas. The utilitarian aspects of the project should be cited and designed to minimize their adverse impacts, not just environmental impacts, although in the larger context they are environmental impacts, but it's the human impacts that I think we're most concerned about. And I think in doing so, in looking at the siting and design of these utilitarian areas, we could encourage the opportunities for additional open areas. And I think something broad like that probably would address my concern about parking, and it's something I've heard from a lot of people about not wanting to look down there and see a lot of bare parking areas and a lot of well-lit parking areas at night. A third objective I want to comment on, and I'm sorry, I should have started this off by expressing my gratitude to staff for what was put together here. Bill, you in particular, and your entire staff. This is excellent, excellent material. But getting to objective number O, providing on-site opportunities for public art and education. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually agree with Dana Dilworth on something tonight. And that's that just providing opportunities is really not substantive enough for something like this. And I think it's a social equity objective. And I think rather than just providing opportunities, we should be a little bit more forceful, like include educational and cultural elements into the mix of facilities for the betterment of current and future generations, and that's within Brisbane and the neighboring communities. But positive, direct language like that goes a lot further than just saying provide opportunities and to provide an understanding of the site. This is an opportunity for us to really provide for the betterment, the cultural and educational benefit of our residents and the residents of the neighborhoods around us. So I think given more time, I could probably come up with a lot more, but as I say, there's been too much good thrown out tonight to just say that, let's go ahead and adopt these things. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lee. Is there anyone else? John, please. Ron, I'm sorry.
Ron Colonna, 81 Paul Avenue, Brisbane, Paul Avenue, Brisbane, that is. I hadn't planned, like Lee, on speaking tonight either, but a couple things came up that kind of seemed to tie together. And with the parking idea, it sounded like if you're familiar with the Potrero Shopping Center on 16th and Potrero, somewhere around in there, but they got a one-level underground parking that provides real quick and easy access to the shops and the stores there. And that kind of parking, where it's covered parking, but rather than being elevated above ground, subterranean would be desirable. And by making it subterranean, you would solve a couple problems. One, it would remediate ground contaminants. You're going to be taking a lot of topsoil off to provide this underground parking. In doing so, you'd also maximize shop space and availability of open green areas, because your parking, again, is out of the way. You'd be maximizing, if you're maximizing shops, you're going to maximize roof areas where you'd have your photovoltaic energy production or whatever for that concern. Let's see. I can hardly read my writing here. It reduces the overburden, and I don't know how useful a comment this is on an engineering aspect, but which would reduce the rate of differential settling. Any of this, whether the shops or anything, are going to be piered down to some sort of substantial ground area anyway, so they would be isolated from the settling, which would be taking place underneath it. I don't know what kind of engineering problems it would present, but it's worth, all these pluses look like an interesting pursuit. And again, at the Potrero, I was just always impressed with how easy it was to get into that shopping area. And you're underground, you walk to the shops, isolated from rain, from wind, which was mentioned here, from even those occasional days where we have heat. Yeah, and by reducing the surface parking, you'd actually extend parking under, it needn't be but one level, or in areas 2 levels. Under shops, or where people can then walk or park near the shopping area they want to go to and easily approach it, free of the parking hassles that are carried on surface parking. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Anyone else? No?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. What's your pleasure, Council? Okay. 5 minutes, please. going to convene the meeting. Okay, do you want to have council comments and then planning commission, or planning commission and then council? Council? Okay.
I can...
Yeah, go ahead.
Mine aren't that significant. I'll just go through the objectives as they're written in the staff report. And starting with environmental objectives, item C, preserve, restore, and enhance wetlands and natural habitat. I was wondering if we needed to specify natural and wetlands and natural, because I don't know that there is a whole lot of natural habitat out there since it's all on landfill. And wetlands are if we could just say habitat, what I did was crossed out wetlands and natural and just said preserve, restore, and enhance habitat on the site consistent with historic area environment, and create naturalistic open space linkages across the site, crossing out the word natural because, again, I don't see a whole lot natural out there. And I'm worried if we're considering the landfill to be natural, then...
Let's not cut out the word wet. I don't know. There actually is natural habitat. I mean, the lagoon itself and the part of the, even the canal, I think, was a waterway at one time and it's still filtering in. So, I mean, there's...
I guess the way I was thinking about it was that the canal is a result of landfill, and the lagoon is also a result of the freeway and the landfill put in for that. I mean, I think wetlands are extremely valuable. It's just I couldn't think of a way to say the land as well, because it calls out wetlands, but it doesn't say anything about the land. And so...
Say wetlands and habitat.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. And I added a little phrase near the end, habitat on the site consistent with historic area environment. And that was to get to what I think everyone is thinking of as the natural state. Since it's all landfill, since it's all artificial, I'm trying to describe a naturalistic state for this landfill so that we get some consistency with the regional environment. And that's why I crossed out natural linkages because, again, it's landfill. It just doesn't seem to me like it's a natural environment out there. These are just my suggestions, and I'll move on to the next one. Now, does this promote and encourage non-vehicular access and movement to and from the site? Would this cover the use of rail to deliver goods to the site and to remove garbage from the site? I guess that's a question for staff.
Good question, too. Non-vehicle, would that include train? I guess the train is a vehicle. It's just a vehicle.
Right, so that's all I'm getting at, is if when we get these environmental objectives back for our next meeting, if we can somehow incorporate the notion that the rail line should bring in as much of the goods to the site as possible, and then it should also remove as much of the garbage from the site as possible, I'd appreciate that. And I was trying to figure out why land use mix is in this item as well. The next sentence on item D says land use mix. What does that mean? Does this actually belong here? Or is land use mix something that we should put under the economic piece? I wasn't quite clear on that.
I think that could mean such things as the mix of public versus private, the mix of office versus retail of the land use, and there's different. So I think it's considered the land use mix in the sense that different combinations of those mixes would have different impacts, I suppose.
Okay. I guess because the items start off with non-vehicular access and movement, I was wondering if land use was really a part of this item, if we could break it out and maybe be a little more specific about what we mean about land use mix. And good urban design, what does that mean? Maybe we can spell out what we think good urban design is? But then it goes on to say the provision of safe and pleasant pedestrian and bike paths. Safe and pleasant, To me, it strikes me as maybe a little bit of a judgment call. I'm not sure that it means anything, but I would like to call out pedestrian and bike paths that are dedicated to pedestrian use and bike paths that are dedicated to bicycle or other human-powered vehicle use, rather than leaving them in here as pedestrian and bike paths that could be shared with automobiles or some other sort of vehicle. I'd like somehow to say that these things need to be distinct for those particular uses. E, strive to achieve energy neutrality or better through efficiency, conservation, and the maximum use of passive or active. So maximum use to me just says that this means the whole site should be covered. That would be the maximum use. It should be covered with what you're talking about. And so I just crossed that out because it doesn't seem to me like we actually need that in there. Strive to achieve energy neutrality or better through efficiency, conservation, and the use of passive and active sources of renewable energy.
How about if we strive to also?
Sounds good to me. Just achieve energy neutrality or better through passive and active sources of renewable energy. I'm cutting out, I dropped a couple of words there. And F, I was kind of confused by what we really meant by it safely and efficiently accommodate project traffic in a manner which does not adversely impact Brisbane. Are we talking about central Brisbane or any part of Brisbane? I was just a little confused on that. If we mean central Brisbane, the character of our little village here, then I think maybe we should just say that. On the social equity objectives, in one of the letters or the emails that we received, somebody was mentioning they'd like to see some infant care as part of any project out there. And I know that's a very specific use, but I'm wondering, is infant care...
Hey Mike?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can we go back to F? You're saying add central Brisbane in there?
Well, I was wondering what we meant by adversely impact Brisbane. And I tossed out the possibility that we're thinking about central Brisbane traffic impacts as being the receiver of the adverse impacts. If we're thinking of something larger than that, I just want to spell out more what it is we're concerned with.
Yeah, I think the intent was to include all of residential Brisbane, or what was the intent there, I guess? That's my question. Because the Northeast Ridge is not necessarily defined part of central Brisbane, but I don't think we want to adversely impact it either.
Right. I'm just trying to be clear on what it is we're concerned with adversely impacting.
Through the chair, I would just say that it says or adjacent communities. And so there are some sections of the city which wouldn't be considered central Brisbane, but they would deserve the same kind of level of concern that adjacent communities would. So I think the statement implies central Brisbane, but as well as other places. So
like Little Hollywood that's an adjacent community.
Again, the objectives are used to frame the alternatives, but they're also used in the findings later on, should you make findings. And to the degree that the objectives are broad and take into consideration all areas of the city. For instance, even outside of central Brisbane, you may have some intersections either created through the project or along Bayshore, Guadalupe Canyon. I'm thinking of whether that would be considered central Brisbane or not. But when you're making findings, it would encompass more findings to if it links back to a more broad definition. So that's just my response. Is I understand that we look at the village as a special place, and